Okay, this is our neuron cell model. And what we see here, kind of coming out of the board, is one neuron. One of the most obvious features of the neuron is the cell body. And the nucleus helps us easily identify it. Here's our nucleus, and here's the nucleolus, which is a dark spot in the nucleus where our RNA production is taking place. You can also see things like mitochondria, and up here, wherever this kind of, I don't know, brown stuff is smooth, that is smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and wherever it looks kind of like it has sprinkles on it, that is rough endoplasmic reticulum. But it's so important in the characterization of a neuron cell body that in the neuron cell body it's called Nissl bodies or Nissl substance. So it is busy making neurotransmitter, which is what chemical signals are sent by from the neuron. Hopefully that made sense. And that cell body is going to kind of come down to a space where we have an axon leading off of it. That space where the axon emanates from the cell body, that is called the axon hillock. So this area right down here is the axon hillock, and that axon hillock leads to this structure. And if we could peel this away, I think we actually can right here, we can see that that blue structure continues on. This is a cutaway of it, so we can see actually into the cell, but all of this blue part is the axon, and it continues up and it continues into the backboard, and it is running through this nerve and it is coming all the way down here to a skeletal muscle cell. So this is a motor neuron that we're looking at, because it is a nerve, or it is a neuron that is going to regulate the contraction of a skeletal muscle cell downstream. So if we come back and look at the axon, this blue layer around the axon is going to have a very distinct morphology and physiology, and so it has its own name, which is called the axolemma. So the blue is the axolemma, and if I put this top layer back on again, we can see that the blue layer is disrupted by sort of this pillow of insulation that's wrapped around it, and then we can see we have more blue here, and that is going to continue down the length of the axon. We will have these pillows wrapped around, but of course they're not pillows. These are actually Schwann cells that wrap around the axon and serve as insulation for the electrical signals that are moving down that axon. So this is a Schwann cell. The top of that Schwann cell is called the neurolemma, and the Schwann cell, this whole pad here of insulation, we call that the myelin sheath. So myelin sheath is very important. When it disintegrates, that's multiple sclerosis. So we can see that maintaining that insulation is very important for the conduction of signals down that axon. So this is one Schwann cell right here. This is another Schwann cell right here, and you can see that there's a brief, it's called a node in between, but this brief space in between where we can see axolemma on top of the axon here. This area is called a node of Ranvier, and if we could see more specifically all the way downstream, we would notice that there are, it will be Schwann cell, and then it will, I should go this way, it'll be Schwann cell and then a node, Schwann cell and then another node, Schwann cell and then another node, and that pattern will continue on all the way down the nerve until we get to the synapse at the end, that neuromuscular junction that you're seeing here in the back of the board. So this is one cell, and as it moves into the board, it is actually meeting up with other groups of cells. So this is one nerve cell here. This is, I guess, the third Schwann cell that you see right here, and you can see that it's bundling together with other nerves in the background. And so here on this cutaway here, each time you see one of these cylinders deep inside, each one of those is one nerve cell's axon, and each of those is going to be surrounded by Schwann cells, creating a myelin sheath, and over the top of that there's another layer of connective tissue called the endomysium. So the endoneurium. The endoneurium is going to cover each of those cells, and then all of those are going to be, or a group of these axons are going to be bundled together into one cylinder that is called a fascicle. And this fascicle is going to be surrounded by connective tissue that is called the perineurium. So perineurium is going to go around the fascicle. There's also going to be perineurium surrounding this fascicle and perineurium surrounding this fascicle. All of these fascicles are then bundled together into a whole nerve, and around the outside of the entire nerve we have what's called the epineurium. So the epineurium is going to go around the entire nerve, and then you can see we're cut away again here, and just the single axon is coming forward, so we can see Schwann cell of the myelin sheath, another node, Schwann cell around here. We can see the axon because they've cut the Schwann cell away to show us that we have layers and layers of the Schwann cell. The Schwann cell is going to jelly roll around that axon to create that myelin sheath. And then we will have, these are called telodendria, a group of branches that branch off into different synapses, synaptic terminals, and at each of these synaptic terminals we'll see a synaptic knob, which are actually easier to see if we look up here, but I'll come back to that in a second. So this is going to be a synaptic knob, but here we're seeing what is going on inside that synaptic knob. So we can see each of these purple dots are going to be synaptic vesicles. They contain the neurotransmitter, which is going to be the chemical signal that will be secreted onto this muscle cell whenever we want the muscle to contract. So that's how a motor neuron works. But where this cell gets its signal is going to be from an upstream cell. So now that we know what a synaptic knob would look like in cross-section, let's look at what it looks like superficially. This is a synaptic knob, and we have to imagine that it is actually connected to some kind of interneuron back in the board. So we have the telodendria kind of cut off of here. We don't have the connections. We only see the synaptic knobs, where the upstream neuron that will tell this cell when it wants the downstream skeletal muscle to contract where that action takes place. So this is a synaptic knob attached to, I should mention, where incoming calls come in, that's the dendrite. So these are the dendrites. Dendrites are connected to the cell body. The cell body needs to make a decision of whether or not to send a message, and that's going to happen at the axon hillock, this early region before we get to the axon. And then that signal will be carried down the axon to the axon terminal, which makes the synaptic terminal or synaptic knob with the downstream cell. And in this case, it's a neuromuscular junction because it is a junction between a neuron and a skeletal muscle cell downstream. All right, hope that helps.